Welcome everybody. Oh, sorry. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for coming out tonight on this incredibly thunderstormy evening that kind of came out of nowhere. I'm so happy to present. My name is Emily Gray. Sorry, I forgot to say that. I am the executive and curatorial assistant here at WaterFire Providence, and it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce this fantastic panel, moderated by my amazing Arts Management Intern, Skylar Gould, who has helped make this whole exhibition possible. This is our first talk of the evening. As you can see in the Arts Center, there's lots of things going on tonight. We have Troop Top out in the main hall, which you can stop by and get a drink at 7 or so once this talk is over. And then we have a second talk happening at 7:30 with another wonderful group of artists. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Skylar to kick it off for the evening.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming in and welcome to the Art and Identity Photography Artist Talk. So like Emily said, my name is Skylar and I'm the Arts Management Intern here, and throughout the summer I've been helping put this exhibition together and also organize these talks. And I'm so excited to be here with all these wonderful artists and get to be a part of this amazing program. So before we get into the interview portion, I wanted to introduce NetWorks a little bit. So NetWorks was initiated by Dr. Joseph Chazan, who actually sadly passed away a few weeks ago. And this program was created to highlight Rhode Island artists, and it ran between 2008 and 2016, and ended up supporting a total of 113 artists, almost all of whom we have represented in the show today, which is really exciting. A major part of the program was creating these mini video documentaries for each artist. And if you want to see those, they're all on the NetWorks website, or they're available on the QR codes on the labels. They'll take you right to that artist's video. And I'm just going to be referencing them throughout these questions, so I wanted to let you know so you're not confused about that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the artists and just have you each introduce yourself, say your name. Usually we would say the medium. I know tonight we're focusing on photography, but if you want to talk about any other mediums you use or how you feel about the label of photography photographer, you feel free to do so. So I'll hand it over.
Hi, my name is Annu Matthew. I started as a photographer, but now use new media and video and sound installation.
Hi, I'm Reenie Barrow, and I'm a photographer, and I've been doing just black and white photography using film and a big camera, and I'm still doing that.
Hello everybody, my name is Beth Meehan, and I'm a photographer, but also I've been experimenting with a lot of mixed media and collage and writing, and so I guess I'm not a photographer anymore.
I'm Salvatore Mancini, photographer obviously, and I've been working as a photographer since 1970, and now I make documentary films, often on the big photographic projects that I've done, so really enjoying it all.
Thank you guys so much. Those were great introductions. So Annu, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to go into some more specific questions about all of your work. And I wanted to ask you about this virtual immigrant series that we have. These are two of the works from that series on display here. And I wanted to ask about your use of these lenticular lenses, which is what gives it this appearance of when you walk around, you sort of see a different image. And I first wanted to ask you if you had this presentation style or media in mind when you first started the project, or if it kind of came to you later, and also just what the process of working with this technique was like as a photographer, or someone who's working beyond photography.
So I'll just give a brief synopsis of what the work is about. The virtual immigrant is the call center workers who work in India, become American for the workday, but then go back to being Indian. And it was similar to my immigrant experience of becoming an American, but being given a pamphlet which said that I'm no longer a hyphenated American. No longer Indian American. And so I kind of envied the virtual immigrant, which is showing up on the screen right now, where they can go back and forth between the two cultures. So when I started the project, I didn't have this technique in mind, but I interviewed the people and photographed them, and every time I lifted the camera, they would stand in the same pose. And so that's how I got the idea, you know, basically the Winkies that you used to get in cereal boxes, that's how I got the idea to blow those up and make them into these lenticular prints. And the process is a software that splices the two images into thin strips and alternates them, and then you put a lens on top of that, and that creates this effect. I mean, I got a lab to actually do the process, but again, you know, because of changes in technology, this process is now accessible for anyone to do versus only for a commercial reason.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. They're like so high definition, and it's really just a great process. And then another question, which I'm going to be asking each person on the panel, is how you kind of see art and identity working together within your work, and like how you approach representing identity within your work, whether it's your own or like others.
I think I'll just add that for me, the technique dovetailing with the concept is really important. And so, you know, every project of mine has a different technique depending on what I'm trying to convey. And my work is about storytelling and looking at lesser known histories, and often that connects to identity because usually it's outside of the American context. So I think identities is kind of an interesting framing or question, because would it be called identity if it was in India? And I'll leave it at that.
That's a very good point. Oh, no, yeah, you can move on, sorry. And yeah, I think it's really amazing how you use the medium to build the storytelling elements. All right.
Yes.
Reenie, my question for you was, in your NetWorks video, you talked about this idea of photographers needing a heightened sense of curiosity when they approach their work. And I wanted to ask you how you sort of cultivated and maintained a curious attitude throughout your career when it comes to your work, and also how you think this curious attitude sort of comes through within your work.
What a good question. I think that the idea of curiosity is just something that some of us have a bigger heightened sense of. Oh, is that better? Oh, sorry, okay. Curiosity is something that some of us just have a lot of, and I think I'm always just curious about things. And what did you ask about? How did curiosity?
Yeah, just like how you have like cultivated this curious attitude, maybe how you approach your work with curiosity, and maybe how it comes through in your work
I think
as well.
that in my work, that I'm often trying to tell a story too. They're different than on news, but it's stories just about the homes that I go into to photograph. I like to think that a stage is set for action. Someone's about to come in, something's going to happen. It's everything about the life of people, and just turning ordinary scenes, but then making you curious about what's going on there. And I think I first started, my first really big project was on doing porches. And because I just love the idea, kind of a romantic notion of sitting on a porch and chatting with your friends and just enjoying the time. And then I was just curious about showing those and letting people then put their own meaning into it. And often people would then approach me after seeing them and start telling me stories about their life on porches with friends. And then I have done a lot of still lifes of flowers, which was a really big challenge to me because I always thought, well, yeah, I couldn't ever do anything of a flower that was anything other than just a pretty picture of flowers. So I started looking at other photographers whose work I admired and what made me keep looking at them. What was it? And it turned out these flowers are about something else. It's a conduit to another thought. So that's how I then started doing my flowers, that it would be evocative of something else. I think the one that really started me was Steichen's Heavy Roses, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that had everything to do with things other than just flowers. It was about life, it was about war, it was about people surviving.
That was a great response. I find it really fascinating how you're talking about like the portraiture and how that brought you into the storytelling, like almost the photography was a way to get into the story. I find really interesting. And I'm gonna ask you the same question about identity, and maybe just frame it as like when you're setting these scenes, do you have like anything in mind as to what you're trying to portray through them, or do you just let it happen? What is your process like of like in these two photos, for example, like setting these scenes where it seems like someone could have just walked in or walked right out?
Oh, well, those aren't scenes that I set. The only ones I set where I really arranged the flowers to evoke a thought process. These are things I find. That one on the right was done in Cuba, and when I traveled around with a Cuban man who took me out into the countryside, and he gave me access that I could get into people's homes. And that was just someone's home, and I was just trying to tell the story of their life in that home.
The one on the left reminds me of Dr. Chazan's identity.
You know, that's was in his private collection, and when he saw that in a show that I was having, he said how much he absolutely loved it, and I said, it makes me think of you because of the hats.
Yeah.
And yes, he did love that.
That's so sweet. It really is like reminiscent of him. All right, I'm gonna move on to Mary Beth. So I have another question more from your NetWorks video. When you were talking about your Seen Unseen series, you were talking about like dominant narratives that influence how we see the world and one another, and how you were kind of subverting these dominant narratives through this series. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of what these dominant narratives are, and also what aspects of this Seen Unseen series work to subvert them.
That's a whole series. Thank you for that question. You know, I have been thinking about that for a long time. You know, when I think about the photography that I've done all these years, it's really been sort of a search for intimacy for me. I just really loved it was like the camera was a ticket or an invitation that I sent myself, or a key to be able to go right to a person and say, I have this camera, can I come into your life and can you tell me about you? Like, could I use this portal in? Because in contemporary life, we have so few portals into other people's lives and their subjectivities. And I think that because we don't have that, dominant narratives grow, erroneous dominant narratives grow, prejudices grow. People can say anything they want to about whomever they want to. And without that kind of one-on-one interaction, how can we know any different? So to me, I mean, I haven't been doing it since the 70s, but it really has been 31 years of chasing people down the street with a camera. And all this, this pursuit of connection. So I guess I kind of want to go at it that way, that the intimacies show that people are way more complicated than the labels. People are way more, they have such deep subjective awareness of who they are and where they stand. And you know, we're in the middle of a political campaign right now where there are all these fights about people that probably some of these candidates don't really know, but they can say what they think they want us to hear or what they don't want us to hear. They can create fear. So Providence is an incredibly rich place full of amazing people, and for 30 years I've met amazing people all over the political spectrum from every country in the world. And you know, when I was working in my hometown of Brockton, I would go to streets and someone would say, "You can't go on that street, you're gonna get shot if you go on that street." And then I'd end up in a home, you know, there was a woman named Binda Barnes. I walked into her house, she was from Cape Verde, but her kitchen looked exactly like my Italian grandmother's kitchen. So these ideas of who people are so wrong. And so I got to stand in for the public. I thought, if I go on my journey with this camera through the lives of people who want to work with me, then the public can sort of get in that river with me. And this camera can be a thread, and we can get to know each other. So I hope I didn't avoid your question, but...
I think you answered it perfectly.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see how like you're using photography as a way, excuse me, to like connect and grow community. And I'm again going to ask you the identity question, but I especially want to ask, since our first work is of course like photography work, and our second work is a collage, sort of how your ideas of identity within art have shifted over time and also across mediums. And if you see it playing into your like multimedia work in the same way you do in like your photography series.
Well, you know, I find I'm resisting that word identity, and I'll tell you why. Because identity has been a speed bump. It's been an important speed bump because people, you know, white people in the world have used the camera to really denigrate and create, I mean, the violence, the denigration, the subjection, all of it has happened with people with white people with the camera. And after George Floyd, there's this really necessary corrective of let's not speak for anyone whose identity we haven't really experienced ourselves. And so that's been a really important pause and an important corrective. I don't think this moment can last forever though, because I think unless we know how to be intimate across difference, we're gonna get in some dangerous silos. And I think we're gonna see that work out. So partly that issue, partly recognizing that I've done it for 30 years, partly feeling kind of exhausted, like each photograph kind of represents a deep emotional engagement for me, you know, and I got kind of tired. But at the same time, I got really interested in what happens when the identity is me. What happens when instead of interacting with another person, I'm interacting with my own impulses in the studio with color and shape and form and composition. There's still all this resonance of yes, you know. I mean, you can let me come over and I can interview you and we can have this amazing experience, but then there's still this visual object that needs to be made. It's all about a kind of instinctive yes, you know, to get to the photograph. Well, what happens if that process is just me in the studio with paper? And so I've really been playing with that, and I was really grateful to WaterFire for accepting one of my things because they're, you know, it's new and feels really experimental. Thank you.
It's been really great to see so many artists. Like because a lot of artists in the show, we have works that are maybe like 10 or even 20, 30 years old, and then a work from, like your work is from 2024. So you really get to see how all of these artists' styles and mediums have changed over time, and it's really interesting to see. Also when you have all the artists all together, just see how everyone has changed. All right, Sal, I'm gonna hand it down to you. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your like shaman series works that we have out in the front. Here's some images of that. And I wanted to ask you about sort of your experiences with depicting religion within your artwork and like combining imagery from different religions and maybe what common themes you see among religious imagery, and also what effect you think religion has in the way we understand art. Sorry, that was a lot to throw you.
Yeah. 1986 that I saw my first petroglyph in a book about National Park in out west, and I was just blown away because I had been out there so many times and never seen anything at all. All of a sudden, there were drawings on rocks. So I quickly bought the book, Polly Shafsmar. I called her up. I said, I'm going to dedicate myself to finding and photograph petroglyphs, which are drawings and paintings on rocks. And she says, come and visit me and I'll help you. So that was 1986. I'm still doing it. So first it became the subject matter, right? It's storytelling, it's mythical stories. But then I began to get a very personal feelings about the shamanism, only whether it's accurate or not, that they remind me very much of the saints that I saw in Catholic iconography. And I've been focusing on those. Those were the ones that affected me the most, okay? And because often I worked into the night and I was far away from my car or anywhere, especially when it was warmer, I would just continue working into the night. And eventually I realized that I could continue working just by not only using the flash, which allows you to take the image off the wall sometimes at night, because you see it and then you don't see it, you see it, and eventually that thing is in your mind, right? I wanted to make them into religious icons. So with a flashlight where I could control the diameter of the light, I began to trace the drawings, okay? So you'll be there for hours at times. Sometimes there'll be, 50, 60 images, small ones, sometimes singular images like this. That first one on the left, the spirit leaving the body, that's up in Wyoming, and that's a particular style from that region. The shaman on the right, which is a gold tone, I'll explain that in a moment, that's from central Utah. And you begin to realize through the greater Southwest, from Baja, from Texas, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, on and on and on, that there are all these regional styles. And when you understood the styles, you could understand the style, you realize they were different tribes, different periods, and when you saw combinations of iconography and images, you realize they mixed up for different reasons, right? So it's a subject matter which has captivated and allowed me to use all my technical skills to talk about them in so many different ways. Sometimes they scare the hell out of me when you're out there at night, because they do separate from the walls, and because of that flash, when you begin to see them in your mind as well on the wall, you don't know if you're inside or outside, if they're inside, it can get really spooky. And often I ask myself when I'm out there, what the hell am I doing out here? Because you're miles and miles away from your car, and you've got a flashlight, of course, but sometimes there's no trails, it's all rocks, and somehow you have to get back to where you can sleep. But it's a subject matter that I'm going to continue as long as I can continue walking. Now I'm trying to turn it into a film project, and now I go out there with a drone, so now I can actually say I'm flying, and sometimes I'm 1,000 feet off the ground on a cliff, and I can send that drone 5 miles out over a canyon, but I know there are petroglyphs down below. So when I think of it as a film project, which is also sort of a summation of all the years I've been working on it, it's going to be, a way to describe it would be like the desert regions, there's 3 different deserts out west, the canyons where the rivers are flowing, and the other one I think would be the plains. So it's a big project, but it connects me back to my religious education and my religious, memories of growing up in Italy, coming to America in a Roman Catholic family, and of course our history is filled with religious iconography. But shamanism is the first religion. And it is also, if you go to the caves in France and in Spain, But equally here in America, we're going back to sometimes 20,000 years now, they're finding footprints. This is the first art. When you talk about the history of art or art history of drawing, this is it right here. And it's on the rocks out in the Southwest. Now, the Southwest is blessed with beautiful stones because it has a dark, dark patina on it. And when you scratch into the patina, you have the contrast of the natural color underneath and the darkness on the top, right? And sometimes it's so old you can actually see when the patina has come back to the drawings. So I guess what I want to say about these pictures, that gold tone, you know, with the snakes, dog, handprint, we say dogs, but it could also be a jaguar, a mountain lion. I actually, when I made that into a big print like we have here, you know, it sort of made me feel like maybe I should take them off the rocks, off the wall, and have like a walkabout, you know, around America. Show him America, you know, show him the other places where other indigenous people made drawings. And I would take that drawing and photograph myself in Texas and Wyoming and other places, but also people that I've met to introduce the shaman to them, right? And so it's really captivated all aspects of my life. What I want to say more about that work is that when I went back to my home, my native village in Itri in 1974, with very, very personal work, I realized that, this one here, this is during the Carnival period, and the people dress up, of course, to enjoy life. But I didn't realize when I put it into the show, it was only brought to my attention by the staff here, that it looked like I was using that also as a representation of the shamans, you know, with a mask and the big Google eyes, you know. I didn't realize I was doing that, but sometimes you think you know what you're doing, but it's really something much deeper. And so I guess, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I want to talk a little more than we can go back to everybody else. What I want to say is that, you know, often we say that the work that we do is subject oriented. Like in each reading, I went back to my life, I discovered documentary photography. I often poo-pooed it because I thought it was about subject matters, right? But then I realized, no, it's not just about the subject matter, it's the way of having a relationship with the subject matter and the people. And I found that people felt that I was showing respect to them and empowering them by giving them attention and photographing them. Now, when they look at those photographs 30, 40 years later, a lot of their parents and relatives are all passed away. They look at those photographs, they break down into tears, right? And say, God, I never thought they were doing something that has so much power, right? But it does happen. So I look at documentary work now, it's both inspirational and informational. And it just opened up the entire subject matter to do whatever I wanted to do with it, okay? So I become a storyteller. And I remember a biblical saying about if your eyes were single, your body will see the light. And I thought, how appropriate that for a photographer, you know? You have two eyes, but you look through a single lens, so now you have one eye, and you're using light to tell your story. I said, what a perfect, symbolic, metaphorical thing to carry with you when you go out to be working. Over the years, I've gone through very, very personal work, big projects on Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay, the forest, the Industrial Revolution, the immigrants from Itri in America, religious shrines from around the world, and it goes on and on and on. And I've really become that subject matter, you know? I look at it and I say, my God, everything I've learned in life mostly is because I put that camera up to my eye and went click. And it allowed me not only to remember all these experiences, but also a sense of ownership of my own life. I I can own my own life because I have photographs of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like you definitely answered my question and also touched a lot on connections with identity, whether it was seeing sort of the own religious education you had grown up with reflected in these shaman drawings, or working in Providence or in Italy is all really fascinating. I'm going to turn this over to Scott. So if you, I know you just are getting thrown into this, but if you want to quickly introduce yourself, and we're talking about photography tonight, but of course you are also multimedia work in the show. So if you want to touch on sort of the mediums you work in and just introduce yourself.
Hey folks, happy to be here. My workday went a little long and there was traffic. So sorry for being late. I'm a photographer and a sculptor. Should I say anything else about myself?
Well, I'm about to ask you, well, if you feel, but
That's good for me now.
all right, perfect. So I'm just going to jump into a question that I had specifically about your work. So in your sort of NetWorks video and also in this Providence cold storage photograph you took, you've done a lot of work where you focus on the history and current issues of sort of industrial mill towns in the Northeast. And I wanted to ask specifically with these works where you're looking at sort of the crumbling infrastructure of these industrial buildings, like how you build a link between past and present through these works, and how you show the identity of these towns and communities through this work.
I was born in North Adams, Mass, which is now the home of Mass MoCA. And that complex of buildings, my father worked there and my grandfather. And my father kind of saw the writing on the wall and started moving closer to Boston for work. And for a long period of time, North Adams in upstate New York, where he was from, resembled a lot more like a Woonsocket or something like that. And I never thought too much about that except for family that was up in that area. I ended up growing up fairly close to Boston, and so I'd hang out there a lot as a kid. And I was running around abandoned brownstones in South Boston when I was a kid. And then in the 80s, I went to college. I came here to go to RISD. And that real estate, these abandoned brownstones, had become like unbelievably expensive. It was shocking to see how quick that turned around. And I started looking around here and thinking that could happen here. And everybody thought it was insane and stupid and crazy, but it has. And I was living and working out of a mill that a lot of artists here know. The mills would go out of business, they'd be abandoned for a while, and then they start chopping them up into artist spaces. So I was in a weird place like that, just over there. And then I really started to appreciate the architecture, the materials that were used in the buildings. A lot of the beams in these old mill buildings were from the Carolinas, from forests that no longer exist because now they exist as the beams in these buildings. And so I really started to appreciate it, and I started to see all these buildings starting to get torn down, and it really started to hit home for me that this was social history, architectural history, to a degree my family history, and so I started documenting it. And I didn't know anything about how to transform these things. I didn't know anybody that could do that. I didn't know about preservation, pros and cons of all these things. But I documented for about 10 years. Building industrial buildings that were getting torn down and made into parking lots and Home Depots and gas stations and stuff that seemed to have a lot less potential and longevity and sustainability than the potential buildings themselves. And it really wasn't pleasant for me to do that, but I just wanted to document these things. And then after about a decade, I stopped because I felt like I was done with the project. I put, and it was great for me to have done that because it felt like an accomplishment. And then in 2016, when I saw what was happening politically with Trump and all that, I pulled out a bunch of these photos and I started to realize that part of the reason that we're in the political situation we're in is because all these jobs were gone. And there's a lot of guys who were not good at school. I wasn't great. A lot of people that really like to work with their hands. I was much better at that than a lot of other things. I recently learned about some learning disabilities that are treatable. I had no idea. I can read at 55 better than I've ever been able to read in my life. So it's crazy. But I could really identify with people that did not find comfort in an office, did not find administrative work easy. Traditionally, it's taken me about 3 times as long to do that as other people, and that means that professionally there's been struggles that other people have, and people that worked in some of these factories. People who could make jewelry molds like nobody's business. They were self-taught. Very complex work, but not work that was transferable once these places came down. So there was like a generation of loss. People's identities were gone. Nobody cared. They could get service jobs, but not jobs that gave them dignity. So I started to really see, and I started to see that. I knew that at the time, but what we're seeing now is partially a backlash to that kind of a thing, and the government didn't really, in my opinion, do a good job to help people find dignity when it was taken away from them, without them knowing why or when it was going to happen and that kind of thing. So when I started to realize that all these other kinds of multimedia artwork started to come out of my head. And so that one to the left is my interpretation of the industrial 20th century. There's I forget what it's called, but there's an architectural detail that I'm very familiar with. We don't make those anymore. But in a lot of the houses of my grandmother's and urban neighborhoods, you get those details. And so it was very interesting for me to see how this work, why I wanted to make it the first body of photographs, but then over time, it really felt like there was a reflection that I couldn't have anticipated, and it was, the crumbling of the Republican Party and the chaos that is unleashing on us, and the danger, just the absolute danger. And so about 5 of those multimedia pieces really came out of it in a very different way. And to me, they feel very complementary, and they feel like one body of work that took a pause of 15 or whatever years. And that time is strange that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how you were talking about shifting from more documenting to more having a direct response from the photography to the multimedia 3-dimensional work. It's really interesting to see, and also hearing your more personal connection to these issues and sort of seeing it happen in the community around you. I think anywhere in the Northeast, especially in Providence, if you look hard enough, you start to see all of the scenes of these industrial era buildings and architecture. So it's really great to see that represented in your work. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions if anyone has any. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. In that case, I'm going to ask you. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I have a question for Mary Beth. I'm certainly intrigued by these portraits that we see around Providence, and I'm wondering where and how you got the idea to make them so big. At what point did they become so monumental?
Thank you, Mayor. So I was photographing in my hometown of Brockton, Mass, a place like where Scott grew up, and in 2007. And this kind of thing kept happening where, you know, Brockton, Mass is the kind of place where when you say you're from there, people say, oh, you must be tough, or you sell drugs, or, you know, it got like that. But, you know, when I grew up there, I mean, the most amazing people. I wouldn't trade having grown up there for anything because of just the world it gave me. And so I lived with that kind of disconnect about a dominant narrative. I felt the dominant narrative, you know? I mean, the principal of Brockton High would say, graduation, we know what people think of us when we say we're from Brockton, but we know differently. Like, it's part of the public story of a place like that. So that's always been in me. And when I was growing up there, it was a majority white city. 25 years later, it was a majority minority city. And my old relatives, Irish, Italian, white, were all moving out. They had all fallen prey to those same stories, those same narratives. And I kept saying to my father, you can't see the connection between your Irish grandmother and this Haitian lady who lives in Main Street, Brockton. It was inconceivable to me that race became this barrier that was insurmountable toward any kind of commonality. So I was kind of like, well, okay, I'm gonna make people see the people who are from here, and I'm gonna make them come here to see them. So that's where I got the idea to put the pictures to blow them up big. You know, we can see Tom Brady that big, we can see Beyonce, why can't we see Benvinda Barnes? She's just as important. Okay, let's use that scale, but then let's not put it out in some gallery that has nothing to do with the city, but let's make people go downtown Brockton and walk up and down the streets if they want to see these pictures. And so it became this incredible fusion of the people themselves, the old timers, the newcomers, the photo people, the art people. I mean, I had them there on the buildings for a whole year, and we did walking tours, and you know, people would have fights about what this picture meant versus what this picture meant. This has got to come down, you know. So it was very energetic. And then it was Bert Kranka who said, "Why don't you do that in Providence?" So it's been a long one. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question from Annu. I'm interested in how you had that process that you sliced everything and then you did all that layering. Do you still use that process, or do you have like just more processes that you use each time? Or
Yes, I have a number of processes. So when I started photography, I photographed with the Holker camera, which is a toy camera. That's the only straight photography that I've done. And from that I moved to diptychs, which were 2 images, which was my project, An Indian from India, which thanks to Jan Howard, who's here, Dr. Chazan bought that for the RISD Museum. And then I moved to the moving image with the virtual immigrant. And from that, I did a number of generations, mimicking an old photograph, and made those into videos, short 1-minute animations. And from that, I've done work on the Indian soldiers who are not acknowledged in World War II, and I've made crystals, 3D etched crystals of the family photographs that I collected. And more recently, I've been projecting some of the photographs of Indian prisoners of war who escaped in Italy and were hidden by Italian families at the risk of their own lives, and projected those photographs into these areas in Abruzzo and photographed them. So it keeps changing and evolving. Abruzzo, right? I keep yeah.
My neighbors from just north of that, Col Pietra.
Yes, I saw that. Yes. So yeah, they were in Avezzano. So my work has evolved over the years, and before I became a photographer, I actually worked. My undergraduate is in mathematics, and I worked in computers. And so for me, in photography, this digital toolbox keeps expanding and evolving, and I just love that challenge of evolving with it.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if mine is for everyone or Renee and Sal, but I'm a psychological anthropologist, and one of the challenges of that particular field is trying to understand people's experiences within their particular context. And so now I'm looking at, you're Renee, right? But I'm also looking at Sal, because part of context includes the history of that context. And I'm just curious if either of you thinks that you are contributing to the anthropological inquiry into both the diversity, but also the commonality of human experiences. I mean, I don't think to get philosophical, but you both made me think of that question. So.
Absolutely. In Italy, I first heard the expression industrial archaeology. So when I decided to photograph the Industrial Revolution here in Rhode Island, I treated it as archaeology. Okay? And when I photographed some of those buildings, or even the 195 bridge coming down, I was thinking of ancient Rome, right? The Forum, right? So yeah, absolutely. I don't know why I often wonder with indigenous cultures, well, that could be the Italians 100 years ago too. Tribal people, what do they ever think about the future, right? So we're always looking to the past in a way to assimilate a bigger identity. And I think for me, it's always been about the search for a bigger identity. Some of it comes just through reading, through knowledge, but when you live it, you know, it's a different experience. What else can it be but the search for a bigger identity, which involves the past, tribal societies, crumbling buildings, and the whole evolution of mankind. What else can it be?
And then Renee's got the bed name.
Right.
On the couch.
Yeah, thank you.
Little macro like.
And I do love your philosophical, I love your philosophical take on things, because I do like to indulge in that. And when I was really documenting in people's homes and how people live and what they love to see and what was important to them, and it told me everything about the people. I was so interested in doing that, and I've done that in lots of different countries and knocked on lots of doors, and people let me come in. And I think that they're absolutely thrilled that I'm interested in just their ordinary life, just their ordinary things. And actually, I published a book in Greece, and it was all done in mountain. The photographs were all done in these remote mountain villages. And it was just in their homes, and it could be their boots next to the stove. It could be anything that they just thought was important in their lives. And when I published the book in Greece, and I went back to the village with these books and gave them to the people, they were also, across from the photograph were poetry by poets like Kazantzakis and people like that, and the people just sat there and thought there was an association between something so simple in their house and a profound poem. So I've just really enjoyed doing it.
Thank you both. All right, we have time for one more if anybody has any last question. All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll say thank you all so much for being part of this panel. It was amazing to hear some perspectives on all of your work. And if anybody has any questions they want to ask individually, if you would all be willing to sit up here for a few minutes, that would be wonderful. If you have to leave, we understand. And we're going to be having another talk starting at 7:30, hosted and moderated by Richard Goulas. So stay around for that.